The Commanders are 7-4. They have been in first place for the majority of the season. That changed a week ago. Then they go to Philly. They lose. So they are now a game and a half back of the Eagles. And if you count the tiebreaker that is Philly actually having the edge head-to-head, it's really a 2.5 game deficit. Now, they play them again, so they'll be able to close the gap with a game. But it gets complicated unless the Eagles hit the skids here to try to imagine them winning the division. But the question for you guys on the phones right now, 800-636-1067 on the MGM National Harbor listener lines. Are your sight lines still set on the NFC East and Washington getting a home playoff game? Or realistically, do you think for them to make the playoffs, which is still very, very likely, a 70+% chance they'll get in, according to most analytics sites, as a wild card, is that now what you're considering? Is just, hey, win 3 of the final 6 or better, get in as a wild card. You're going to have to go on the road and try to upset somebody, but that's the more likely path. Or do you still hold out hope and really think they've got a legitimate chance to win the division? Because, Danny, they still play Philly head-to-head.
They do. And I guess here's where my mind is. I was actually thinking hard about this. Obviously, you hope that. You'd prefer, given the choice. What do you want? I'll take the division, right? That's something that's obvious. It means they beat Philadelphia again. It means Philadelphia probably isn't playing as well later as they are right now. It means a number of positive things for Washington, right? You can go above and beyond in this kind of magical run of a season. Realistically, though, for me, just trying to take any kind of emotion out of it is, I don't think it's anything but the wild card. I don't think they're quite there. I don't think they're quite good enough to not have a slip up and they haven't, by the way, they haven't lost to any team that's below them, you would say, right? Like their losses are to the good football teams on their schedule. I know Tampa isn't as good now as they were in the beginning of the year when they were healthy, but that was a really good team when Washington lost to them. Same with Baltimore, same with Philadelphia, and same with Pittsburgh now that we've seen that. So I think they're below that tier, but above the tier of everybody that's in the dregs, that's in the mediocre bucket, et cetera. I think the more realistic path is the wild card. And I'm not taking that for granted. There are 3 teams, all 5-5, a game and a half back. Now, I know a game and a half isn't what it is in baseball. There's so few, but they're, teams like San Francisco, the Rams were playing better football. Seattle had their best game of the season this past week, probably most impressive win against the aforementioned 49ers. You look at that North Division where there's 3 teams all with really, really good records. The point is it's crowded, and they need to handle their business just to make sure they get that much. And that's kind of where my line is.
Well, so there's no doubt. I think you said it's more realistic. I mean, this is a math equation to an extent, and it's obvious. If you look at the odds, they're over a 70% likeliness of making the playoffs as a wild card. They're not that to win the division, right? So the chances are obviously a lot better. They're currently not leading the division. They currently are in the wild card pretty comfortably. If you look at the odds right now, what are their odds to win the East as opposed to get in via wild card?
So their odds to win the East are plus 350 at the moment, whereas their odds to make the playoffs are minus 500.
Okay, so worded differently for those of you that aren't gamblers, plus 350 means they are a heavy favorite. Excuse me, I mean a heavy underdog, like a massive, substantial underdog to win the division. Whereas minus 500 means they are a significant favorite. It would be shocking if it didn't happen at minus 500. So odds makers are telling you they're not going to win the East, but they're definitely going to make the playoffs. So I'm not asking what's more realistic. If I worded it that way, I'll apologize. I guess my question is, based on what lies ahead, have you given up hope of them winning the NFC East right now in this moment? Yes or no? And that's the question.
Yeah.
800-636-1067.
I would say yes, although I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a little sliver that's still, but it's very quiet. It's alone in the dark in a corner. Like the majority of the room is me going, yeah, it's the wild card.
So you're on to the wild card.
I'm on to the wild card.
I am not yet. And maybe it is that I just haven't seen Philly the same way most people have this year, every step of the way. But Philly's remaining schedule is worse than Washington's. So here's the way I see this. Do I think the Eagles will go 3-4 down the stretch? No. But there is a path to that, definitely. And if they do, they would be 11-6. And I think Washington's going to finish 11-6. That's where I have the Commanders. So first, let's go through Washington's remaining schedule as they are, again, chasing Philadelphia. They have 2 games before their bye currently, 7-4. They play Dallas at home. That is a game they're 9-point favorites in. They'll be playing a backup quarterback. Remember a couple of years ago when they played backup quarterbacks for Dallas with the early Rivera era, and they worked them 41-16 on Thanksgiving or whatever. They dominated them twice. I'm not saying that's going to happen. Football is quirky and strange, but it's what should happen. They should, if they're any good, if they are changing the culture, if Dan Quinn is a coach of the year candidate and Jaden Daniels is worthy of MVP consideration and is the runaway rookie of the year, and he's going to pull away from Bo Nix, then they should be able to handle their business against the Cowboys. If they don't beat the Cowboys this weekend, by the way, we need to start having very different conversations. Things like what's going on with the offense, what's going on with Kingsbury, what's going on with Daniels, assuming that they don't get right, which I think they're going to. Because all year long, as you said, they've dominated teams like Dallas and they've gotten fat. They've harvested their nuts offensively. They put up their numbers and really made themselves pretty elite offensively against teams like the ones they're playing coming up. But I think they'll be 9-4 going into the bye. I've also got a win in the final week of the season against Dallas. So that's 10-4. And then I'm looking for one win to get them to 11-6 in those other three games.
Saints, Eagles, Falcons.
Right. And by the way, they should be able to win two of those because New Orleans is not particularly good. The Falcons got beat 38-6. They're not all that good. They're on the road coming here. But let's just say 1-2. If you can beat Philly, by the way, that's a bonus value point there. But that's 11-6. So let's say they beat Philadelphia, they lose to New Orleans and Atlanta or whatever, they get to 11-6. Here's the path to the Eagles also being 11-6. And they would have to have obviously lost the game to Washington along the way for that tiebreaker to go Washington's way at that point. Because the Commanders are tiebreaker friendly right now. They have 2 losses in the AFC against the Ravens and the Steelers, which is actually a pretty big deal. Now, if you look at the Eagles, they're 3-0 against the AFC. They have 2 losses against the NFC.
Bucks and Falcons both beat them.
And the common opponents, I think, for Washington, depending on how things shake out in the end, might work out okay too. But I digress. They play the Rams this week. This is huge. This is going to be a Monday night football game coming up. A Sunday night football game coming up next Sunday night. That's a massive tilt. If the Rams could somehow knock off Philly, which I think is doable, I'm not betting on it, but I think it could happen. Now you're 0-1. Then they play the Ravens. Could they lose that game?
Absolutely.
Okay, 0-2. They're going to whoop the Panthers. Then they play the Steelers. Could they lose that game? All right. There's a third. Then they play Washington. In this hypothetical, the Commanders come back and get them at home. Now they're 1-4 in this stretch. And then they win with 2 games in a row going into the end of the season, Cowboys and Giants. To finish 3-4. They're 11-6. Washington's 11-6. And the Commanders have taken the second game to break up the tiebreaker with a split. And then they have the better metrics in division and conference. That's the path. Now, I'm John King at the board telling you got to win this county. You got to get X percent in this state. You got to come out of this. The path to 270 is right here. 2 teams at 11-6. I don't think that's that crazy. I think it's a little unrealistic, but
it's not crazy at all.
I will give up hope. Like I'll be where you are when I say, yeah, I don't see the division. If they beat the Rams and the Ravens and they're 2-0, and now they're 10-2 after those 2 tough games in a row, going into the stretch run with the Panthers coming up.
So the main reason I don't have a larger sliver of hope in the pie is the overall, everything you just said is right. I mean, that's objective. That is correct information. Basically, I came to the conclusion as follows. Is Philly really going to end the year going 3-4? Like, is that really what's about to happen for Washington and then have kind of that best path to win the division? Because I'm sort of spinning 2 plates here, talking about Washington's future. They could, by the way, beat all the bad teams on their schedule, end up with 12 wins. That's not crazy. It's also not crazy that they could have what happens to every NFL team, drop one of these games, late season against the team that's got nothing to play for, but also nothing to lose. You don't play your best game, or someone has a good plan, or somebody has a great game, whatever. Things happen. But if Washington holds serve and does what they can do, is Philly really going to finish the year 3-4? And it's not crazy that they would, but it just doesn't feel right to me. But their schedule would allow for it.
Answer this for me. Washington right now 7-4. Before they play the Eagles again, they've got the Cowboys, Titans, and Saints. What do you think they go in those 3 games?
2-1.
Okay. I think worst case they go 2-1. But let's just say it's 2-1. There's a letdown and they don't go 3-0. You'd agree with me. It's more likely they go 3-0 than 1-2.
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
So let's say they're 9-5 going into that game with the Eagles at that point. Philly in that time has Rams, Ravens, Panthers, Steelers. What do you think their record's going to be in those 4 games?
2-2.
Okay. Let's assign them 2-2. They are 10-4 against Washington's 9-5. That's now a first place game
Yep.
at Northwest Stadium on December 22nd. And that's based on what you think's going to happen and what I think's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's say they beat Philly in that game. Washington's 10-5, and so is Philly. 2 weeks left. The Eagles have the Cowboys and the Giants. Washington has the Falcons and the Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
Slightly harder schedule, but they would then be back in the driver's seat potentially with their favorable tie-breaking metrics.
With only one NFC lost in the mix, assuming one of those losses where Washington's going quote unquote 2-1 isn't to the Saints or Dallas.
Correct. So that's kind of my point is
it's not crazy.
You go through the next 4 weeks before they play, you can absolutely see them within a game playing the Eagles for first place.
Without a doubt. That is totally true.
I want to know what you guys think about the possibility of the division. Because it goes without saying that going to Philly was a little bit of a tell. Exposed is maybe too strong because it all happened in the fourth quarter and the walls caved in. But it certainly felt like the Commanders weren't on their level. But they don't really have to be. They got to beat the bad teams on their schedule. They've got a favorable schedule coming up, certainly in the next 2 weeks before the bye. Now, the Saints have won 2 in a row since firing their coach. But forgive me, I just still don't think they're that worrisome an opponent. I think it's a toss-up type game on the road, but one that is extremely winnable indoors on carpet for this offense and Jaden Daniels if he's playing like he did earlier in the season.